Chapter 1. Annie, how could you be this shameless? The man's voice was low, but the anger in it was unmistakable. Annie Morrison's head pounded, a dull throbbing pain that made her feel like she was waking up from heavy anesthesia. Wasn't she deceased? But then where was she? Instinctively, she reached out, trying to make sense of her surroundings, but her hand landed on something solid, a strong, muscular arm. Before she could comprehend what was happening, her wrists were seized. In an instant, the world flipped, and she found herself pinned beneath a man. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to struggle, but he was too strong. His hands gripped her wrists, holding them firmly above her head, leaving her completely powerless. Their eyes locked in the dim light. His gaze was sharp, cold, and unyielding, dark eyes that gleamed with control. His lips set in a taut line of disdain. Shameless? Annie's mind whirled in confusion. What was he talking about? She glanced around, disoriented, trying to get her bearings. His looming figure blocked most of her view, but through the dim light, she noticed something. White lace streamers draped across the walls, the large "just married" sign glaring at her like an accusation. "I was supposed to marry Pearl Morrison," he said, his voice hard as stone. "Get dressed and get out of here. If I see you again, you'll regret it." He turned to leave, his words cold, final. But Annie's instincts kicked in. Without thinking, she grabbed the hem of his coat, stopping him mid-step. "What now, Annie?" he growled, his voice sharp with barely restrained fury. His face was like stone, rigid, unforgiving, his presence overwhelming. It sent a tremor of fear through her. She flinched, but she didn't let go. Her eyes darted to the calendar hanging on the wall, a tear-off page clinging to the top. The deep green of the date stared back at her, sharp against the dim light. September 10th, 1988. This can't be real. But it was. She wasn't dreaming. She pinched her thigh hard, and the sharp pain that followed was all the confirmation she needed. She had been sent back. Back 20 years. Her mind raced. This was the night it all went wrong. The night after she'd failed her college entrance exams. The night her mother, desperate to secure a better future for her younger sister Pearl, had forced Annie to switch places and marry Charles Mendez, a disgraced soldier. She had been drugged and dumped at the Mendez family estate like an unwanted bride. And Charles? He'd wanted nothing to do with this arrangement either. The moment she woke up, he had wasted no time in accusing her of being shameless. So the man standing in front of her now was Charles. Annie's chest tightened. Looking around the room, her eyes lingered on the white wedding flowers and pastel decorations, and a flood of conflicting emotions washed over her. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Charles, can we talk? Just the two of us." He stood tall, his posture rigid, his face half hidden by the shadows in the room. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were dark, piercing. For a long moment, he just stared at her, saying nothing. Then, to her surprise, he gave a curt nod. "Fine." Annie exhaled, the tension in her chest easing just a little. Annie took a quiet breath to steady herself. She squared her shoulders, reminding herself that she wasn't at fault here. She had been trapped in this situation, and there was no reason for her to feel ashamed. Lifting her chin, she met Charles's intense gaze. "I'm not going back. I'm staying with the Mendez family." She remembered it all too well. The last life on her wedding night, after Charles had stormed out of the room, she'd received a letter. The letter had been written in John Olson's handwriting, the man who was supposed to be her fiancé. It said that both he and the Olson family were shocked by the last-minute bride swap. He asked her to come back home to fix everything. Annie hadn't wanted this marriage to begin with, so the moment she read John's letter, she packed her things and left, thinking she was finally free of this nightmare. She'd waited, heart pounding, for John to come and rescue her. But the one who came for her wasn't John Olson. It was Tom Newman. He dragged her into the woods, and that night, her life was torn apart. She had screamed for help. No one came. While she was drowning in despair, Pearl, her sister, spent a blissful wedding night with the man who was supposed to be Annie's husband. The next day, Tom showed up with a marriage proposal. He offered a hefty bride price, and her mother, Hedwig, agreed to it without hesitation. From that moment on, Annie's life, which had once seemed full of promise, fell into ruin. Tom was a gambler. It didn't matter how hard Annie worked or how much she earned, he would gamble it all away. And when the money was gone, he drowned himself in alcohol. When he was drunk, he took his frustrations out on her. She had tried to escape. She had tried to divorce him. But every time he had beaten her severely. In the end, he sold her off for $75,000, sold her to Pearl. And Annie had passed away during a surgery. The memories of her past life weighed her down like a heavy stone. But they also brought clarity. This time she couldn't go back to her family. She couldn't let herself be trapped by Tom again. Taking a deep breath, she looked Charles in the eyes. I don't care if you believe me or not, but you need to know, I never wanted this marriage. Pearl set me up. I don't know what lies she told you, but I do know she never wanted to marry you. She's been having an affair with John for months. She paused, watching his expression closely. He didn't react, but she had no choice but to keep going. After I failed my college entrance exams, my mother kept talking about switching us, but my father and I refused to agree. That's why the swap didn't happen earlier. But Pearl forced their hand, because she's pregnant with John's baby. Annie, Charles interrupted, his voice low and skeptical. What game are you playing? His voice wasn't raised, but the disbelief in his eyes was clear. He didn't believe a word she was saying. You'll say anything to stay here, won't you? His tone was sharp, cutting. Annie fought to keep her frustration in check. Pearl had laid a perfect trap for her. A trap that had stolen John from her and left her bound to a man she'd never wanted to marry. In her last life she had fallen for it. But not this time. Not again. I'm not lying and I'm not trying to play games, she said, her voice steady. If you don't believe me, I'll prove it. Pearl and John plotted this together. They persuaded both the Mendez and Olsen families to go along with the switch. That's how the swap happened on the day of the wedding. Annie's voice grew firmer. Our families weren't even supposed to have weddings on the same day. It was my mother who insisted we get married at the same time, right? Charles's expression darkened, but he gave a small nod. Fine. Then explain this. He pulled a letter from his coat. If John and Pearl were really in love, why would John send this letter asking you to come back? If what you're saying is true, this letter makes no sense. Annie's heart sank. She knew this letter was a key piece of the puzzle. If she couldn't explain it, Charles would never believe her. She glanced at the familiar handwriting on the letter, and then met his gaze. That letter wasn't written by John. It was written by Pearl. Charles's frown deepened, but he remained silent, waiting for her explanation. Pearl knew that once she and John had gone too far, there was no turning back. The swap was done, and she had nothing to worry about anymore. But she needed to make sure I stayed out of the picture. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted to make sure everyone believed I was the villain. That's why she sent this letter. It was the perfect way to manipulate me. And it worked. I packed my bags and left, thinking John still wanted me. But it was all a lie. Annie smiled bitterly. If not for her rebirth, she wouldn't have seen through Pearl's deep schemes. Charles's expression shifted, though he was trying to mask his surprise. What does she gain from all this? A bride swap, two sisters, such hidden truths behind it all. Tom, Annie said, her voice steady. The drunk, gambling scumbag from the village next door. He wanted to marry me, and he was willing to pay my mother $200 for the bride price. Pearl, always looking for an easy way out, agreed. She thought the money would make life better for her in the Olsen family. Annie met his eyes, her gaze unwavering. Charles, I don't want to marry Tom. Let me stay. Her voice softened. I know you didn't want to marry me either. I'll make you a deal. In 2 years I'll leave. I'll file for divorce myself. But until then, I'll be the wife you need me to be. I promise I won't cause you any trouble. Charles studied her in silence. This girl wasn't the timid, fearful person he had thought she was. Now she sat before him with calm determination, speaking clearly and confidently. People didn't change overnight. Something had happened to her. Either she had been hiding her true self all along, or something had fundamentally changed her. Which one was it? Chapter 2. 3 days later, it was time for Annie's first visit back to her family. She and Charles made a quick stop at the local grocery store before heading to her parents' house. As they stepped down from the taxi, Annie carefully tucked the clothes Charles had bought into a safe spot at her Uncle Wilton Morrison's place next door. She didn't want them getting noticed just yet. When they finally reached the Morrison family home, they arrived just in time to see a sleek Harley-Davidson motorcycle pulling up, the kind everyone in town dreamed of owning. John and Pearl had arrived too. John and Pearl climbed off the bike, and for a brief moment, the two couples stood face to face. Pearl was dressed in a brand new red wool coat, her hair pinned back with a shiny butterfly clip, clearly something freshly bought from the mall. She radiated smug satisfaction. There wasn't a hint of embarrassment as she walked over with a bright smile. "Hey sis," she greeted sweetly. Annie, on the other hand, still wore her old, faded jeans and a worn flannel shirt. Her hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked neat and clean, but there was no hiding the contrast between her and Pearl. Standing side by side, Pearl looked every bit the pampered suburban girl, while Annie appeared more like a grounded countrywoman. But then, Pearl's smile faltered the moment her eyes landed on Charles. Who was this man? Why was he standing next to Annie? Even though Whitehill Village was right next to Willowbrook, Charles Mendez had left for the army when he was just a boy, and Hedwig, their mother, often dismissed the Mendez family, saying they had fallen on hard times and weren't worth associating with. So, Pearl had never actually seen her so-called fiancé Charles in person. Pearl might not have recognized him, but John did. "Annie." "Charles." John greeted them casually, his voice steady. Pearl froze, her mind spinning. She looked up at the man standing beside Annie, tall, broad-shouldered, and as strong as a tree. Her first reaction was disbelief. This was Charles? Wasn't he supposed to be some kind of brute? A criminal? Dressed in rags, looking like a vagrant? But the man in front of her was nothing like that. His deep, sharp eyes seemed to see right through her. His features were striking, strong jawline, high cheekbones, and he carried himself with a confidence that made him impossible to ignore. He stood tall, towering over everyone, and exuded a rugged handsomeness that was rare in these parts. Not just Whitehill Village. Probably the whole town couldn't boast a man like him. Yes, he was the kind of man who commanded attention. He was nothing like John. John, with his fair, scholarly looks, seemed almost fragile in comparison. This man radiated a masculinity that made Pearl's heart race. Pearl could hardly believe it. How could this perfect man be the same Charles she had gone to such lengths to avoid marrying? The same man she had schemed to pass off to Annie? The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. All her careful plotting, all her efforts to avoid this marriage, and Annie, quiet, insignificant Annie, had ended up with a husband like this? While Pearl struggled to process what she was seeing, John's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Annie. It had been months since he'd last visited the Morrison family. The last time he was here, he had delivered the news that if Annie passed her exams, they could get married. But he hadn't been back since then. He had spent most of his time with Pearl, losing himself in their secret affair. This was the first time he'd seen Annie in quite a while, and something about her had changed. The Annie he remembered had always been hunched over, her hands and face grimy from a day full of chores. She never looked him in the eye, always keeping her head down, as if ashamed to even be seen. She had been thin, pale, and unremarkable. He had used the excuse that she had to pass her exams before they could marry, but the truth was, he had never been interested in her. But now, Annie had changed. Her eyes sparkled with life, clear and bright, with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. Even in her simple, worn clothes, she exuded a quiet grace that put Pearl's flashy appearance to shame. And when it came to pure looks, Annie was in a league of her own, far more striking than Pearl could ever hope to be. John's gaze lingered on Annie a little too long, and Charles, noticing this, stepped slightly in front of her, shielding her without making a show of it. His voice was calm but firm. "Since everyone is here, let's head inside together." "Of course, darling," Annie responded with a bright, sweet smile, leaning into Charles's side as though it was the most natural thing in the world. John's jaw clenched slightly. Something about the way Annie and Charles were together stirred a discomfort he couldn't quite name. He turned to Pearl, his voice curt. "Well, don't just stand there. Get the gifts for your father." The Olsen family was known for their wealth, and they hadn't come empty-handed. They brought an impressive spread, gourmet cheeses, fine linens, and even luxury items like artisanal wine and smoked meats, the kind of things you didn't often see in small-town homes. But Pearl, still stunned by the sight of Charles, stood frozen in place. It wasn't until John snapped at her again that she finally moved, snapping out of her daze to unload the gifts. Annie watched Pearl's flustered movements with quiet amusement, a faint smirk playing at the corner of her lips. It was obvious why Pearl had come up with the whole bride swap scheme. In her mind, John was the better prize, the more desirable man. She had been driven by jealousy and spite, which led her to betray her own sister. And John? He'd only gone along with it because he had never thought Annie was good enough for him. But what if everything they believed was wrong? Pearl had already given herself to John, and the marriage switch was a done deal. Regret wouldn't change the past. They were stuck with the consequences of their choices, no matter how bitter the reality might be. Just then, Hedwig, the Morrison family's matriarch, bustled out of the house. Her husband, Corbett Morrison, was still out in the fields, so it fell to her to do the welcoming. Her face lit up when she saw the gifts from the Olsen family, her smile stretching so wide it seemed like her wrinkles might smooth out. "Oh, Pearl. John, you didn't have to bring all of this, but it's so thoughtful of you. I always knew Pearl was lucky to marry such a considerate man." She didn't even glance in Annie or Charles's direction. Annie wasn't surprised. She had grown up under Hedwig's constant disapproval. The cold indifference no longer stung. What did bother her, though, was that Charles had to witness it. If it weren't for her, Charles wouldn't have to put up with Hedwig's cold shoulder. As if sensing her thoughts, Charles glanced her way, and for a brief moment their eyes met. In that quiet exchange it felt as if time slowed, the chilly winter air swirling between them, carrying unspoken understanding. "Sister, I brought something for you," Pearl said, breaking the moment. She approached Annie with an oversized sack slung over her shoulder, a forced smile on her face. With exaggerated sweetness, Pearl positioned herself between Annie and Charles. "These are some clothes I've worn over the years. They're a bit worn, patched up here and there, but the fabric is top quality." Then with a flourish she opened the sack. Inside was a pile of old threadbare clothes, some so worn they were practically falling apart. The fabric had been washed so many times it was almost transparent in places. It was clear these were items no one in their right mind would wear anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate Annie. Annie's smile didn't falter, but it turned cold as she eyed the pile of rags. "Looks like you're being treated well at the Olsen household, Pearl. On your very first day, they've already given you so many clothes." Her tone was sharp, and there was a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "But since they're gifts from the Olsens, you should keep them." Pearl's face tightened, but she quickly masked it with a tearful, pitiful expression. Her eyes flicked to Charles, hoping to elicit some sympathy. "Sister, are you saying you're too good for these clothes? I only bought them because I couldn't bear the thought of you freezing in this cold weather. I just wanted to help, especially now that you're living with the Mendez family." "Well, isn't this just like you, Annie?" Hedwig snapped, her voice sharp and biting. "Your sister brings you perfectly good clothes, and you have the nerve to act like you're too good for them. Ungrateful, that's what you are. Is this how you treat family? You're already so selfish, what next? Are you going to stop respecting me as your mother, too?" Annie didn't even glance at her mother. Her voice was as cold as the winter air. "Her kindness is something I'm not interested in." "Mom!" Pearl's voice rose, dripping with forced innocence. "I was just trying to be nice, bringing my sister some clothes, but she doesn't appreciate it at all. Just look at her attitude. Hold it right there." Hedwig marched over, her face flushed with anger. She grabbed Annie's arm roughly, her fingers digging into her skin. "You witch! Can't you see you've upset Pearl? She's in tears because of you. Apologize to her right now." In all the years Annie had called this woman mother, she had never once felt the warmth of love that word was supposed to carry, not in her past life and not in this one. Normally, this would be the part where she'd lower her head, mutter an apology, and accept whatever humiliation came her way, just to keep the peace. But not today. Annie glanced down at her arm, still clutched in Hedwig's iron grip, and calmly pulled herself free. "Mom, you treat Pearl like she's some precious gem, but to me, I'm nothing more than a burden, a witch? Is that how a mother talks to her daughter? Am I still your daughter?" Hedwig's face twisted with fury. "What are you even talking about? Of course you're my daughter. What, you think you're too good for this family now? Trying to drive me to the grave, are you? She raised her hand, ready to grab Annie again. But before she could make her move, Charles stepped in. His hand shot out, knocking Hedwig's arm aside with a swift, fluid motion. His face, usually calm and composed, was dark with anger. There was no mistaking the warning in his eyes. Hedwig froze. She had always treated Annie like this, without a second thought, without anyone stepping in to stop her. She certainly hadn't expected Charles, silent and stoic as he often was, to intervene. Her mouth hung open as if she were about to yell, but no words came out. She just stood there, momentarily stunned. Chapter 3. I've already bought Annie some clothes, Charles said coolly, his eyes flicking over Pearl's smug face before landing on Hedwig. His gaze was enough to make her step back, visibly rattled. If you're so fond of these, why don't you keep them for yourself? With that, he took Annie's hand and led her inside, not giving either woman a chance to respond. Mom, did you see how they… Pearl began to whine, but Hedwig, still shaken by Charles's icy glare, wasn't about to stir things up further. Those two pathetic fools, like they'll ever wear anything this fine in their lifetime. But aloud, she turned her attention back to Pearl, her tone soft and sweet. Oh, Pearl dear, you must be frozen from the trip. And how are you adjusting to married life in the Olsen household? They continued their conversation, laughing as they welcomed John inside. Lunch was a quiet family affair, with everyone seated around the table. Afterwards, Charles was whisked away by Wilton for a game of chess, leaving Annie alone in her room, lying on her side under a thick quilt, her back to the door. That's when Pearl slipped in, quietly closing the door behind her. Her eyes scanned the room before settling on Annie's still form, a flicker of resentment crossing her face. But when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost sweet. Sis, are you awake? Pearl's tone was laced with fake concern. I just wanted to say I'm sorry about the whole wedding thing. You know how Mom is. Once she made up her mind that I had to marry John, there wasn't anything I could do. It's not like I had a choice. She played the part of the innocent victim perfectly, her words dripping with false sincerity. Annie didn't move, didn't even acknowledge her. But Pearl wasn't about to give up. I know it must be hard for you, she continued, her voice coaxing. You never wanted to marry Charles, did you? Something shifted in the air. Annie's eyes snapped open, and a strange light flickered in them. Thoughts of the past few days flashed through her mind, each memory more vivid than the last. It's my fault, Pearl went on, her tone now heavy with faux guilt. If Mom hadn't pushed me to marry into the Olsen family, you wouldn't have been stuck with a man who's… well, let's just say he's not exactly in good standing. I feel awful about it. I really do. If there's anything I can do to make it up to you, just let me know. I'll do whatever I can. The performance was flawless, her voice thick with emotion, her eyes wide with earnestness. If Annie didn't know better, she might have been moved by her sister's sincerity. But Annie wasn't the same person anymore. She sat up slowly, her gaze locking onto Pearl's. And what exactly do you think you can do for me? Pearl hesitated, clearly not expecting such a direct question. Her eyes darted around the room as if searching for the right words. Well, I wasn't sure at first, but now I think I understand. You still want to be with your real fiancé, don't you? You still want to marry John. Annie's eyes bore into her. So you knew. Her voice was calm, but the weight of her words was unmistakable. Pearl faltered, suddenly unsure of herself. Annie wasn't just asking about the engagement. She was asking if Pearl had known exactly what she was doing when she took John for herself. I knew, Pearl stammered, quickly slipping back into her practiced innocence. And I'm so sorry. I even talked to John about it, you know. He really liked you, but his mother didn't approve. And when you didn't get into university, he was too scared to go against his parents. That's why he never asked you to marry him. He didn't want to upset them. Annie's face was unreadable as she listened, her expression giving nothing away. But when his parents finally agreed to the wedding, he was thrilled. Only when he saw me standing there instead of you was he devastated. Pearl continued, her voice full of false sympathy. He really was heartbroken. She paused for effect and then added, oh, and he wrote you a letter. Did you ever get it? Annie blinked, feigning confusion. A letter? What letter? I never got anything. Damn it, Mary can't even handle something this simple." Pearl muttered under her breath, irritation flickering across her face. But when she turned back to Annie, she wore that same practiced, sympathetic smile. "You know what? Why don't I help you two out? John's crazy about you. I'm sure he'd leave everything behind if it meant being with you." Annie raised an eyebrow, her voice cool. "You're suggesting I run away with John?" Pearl hesitated, her smile faltering for a moment before quickly recovering. "I wouldn't call it running away. I'm just helping you two get the happy ending you deserve. Are you really willing to let John go?" Annie's voice lowered, her tone as cold as the night air. "Nope, fine. You're right." Annie had rested long enough. She decided to go find Charles. But as she reached the door, she was surprised to see John standing there, his face tight, the effects of the alcohol clearly wearing off. When he saw her, he stepped forward. "Annie, we need to talk." Annie frowned. "What now? Was this about revenge? When did it start?" John's voice cut through her thoughts, low and accusing. "When did what start?" Annie asked, crossing her arms. "You know what I'm talking about." "No, I don't. If you've got something to say, stop playing games and say it." "Charles. You and Charles. When did it start?" His voice was sharp, filled with accusation. Annie's irritation flared. So this is what he was getting at. She clenched her fists. "What are you implying, John?" "I'm saying, Annie, don't you remember? You were supposed to be my fiancé." Annie let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, now you remember I was your fiancé? Funny how that works. But where was this energy when you were sneaking around with my sister? Care to explain that?" John's face twisted in anger, his eyes narrowing. When did you become so shameless?" Annie's eyes flashed with cold fury. "Shameless? Me? Take a good look at yourself before you start throwing around accusations. Whether I'm shameless or not isn't for you to decide. But you? You were engaged to me and couldn't keep your hands off Pearl. And now she's pregnant with your child. If anyone here is shameless, it's the two of you." John's face darkened, his temper rising. "You're going to divorce Charles." John's voice was tight with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. "You'll leave him, Annie. You'll divorce Charles and you'll stay away from him for good." Annie stared at him, incredulous. Then she let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You can't be serious. Who do you think you are? What gives you the right to demand anything from me?" Her voice grew colder with each word. "And here's a little advice, back off. Because if you keep pushing me, I might just let everyone know about your little secret with Pearl. Let's see how you and the almighty Olsen family handle the scandal when the whole village finds out that Pearl's pregnant before the wedding. You won't have a shred of dignity left." She didn't wait for his response. Without looking back, she turned on her heel and walked away, heading straight for the room where Charles was playing chess. "Annie!" John shouted after her, his voice trembling with fury. "Annie, stop!" But Annie didn't even break her stride. As she rounded the corner, she spotted a tall figure standing under the eaves, hands clasped behind his back. She smiled, relief washing over her as she recognized him. "Charles!" He looked at her, his expression calm, though his eyes held a quiet intensity. He had clearly had a few drinks, but he was still composed, still in control. "So what's your plan?" he asked, his voice measured. Annie didn't hesitate. "Pearl came to me earlier, asking if I'd seen some letter John supposedly wrote me. I told her I hadn't. Then she had the nerve to suggest I run away with him tonight. Said she didn't want to see me suffering here with the Mendez family." Charles's gaze darkened, though his face remained impassive. "It seems like neither of them has much of a conscience." Annie nodded, her voice crisp with resolve. "They deserve each other. It's nice to know you trust me, Charles." What she didn't say, though, was the thought that filled her heart. "I'm glad I ended up marrying you instead of Pearl." Charles looked thoughtful for a moment before speaking. "A month ago, I saw Pearl and John sneaking around in that old abandoned house on the east side of the village." Annie's eyes widened. He knew about them. For a whole month? Then why? Her mind raced back to that night. If Charles had known about Pearl and John, why had he still said he wanted Pearl as his bride? Charles met her gaze, and this time, his eyes weren't as cold as usual. There was a warmth there, something she hadn't expected. "I heard about you not passing your college entrance exam." he said quietly. That night, when I said I wanted to marry Pearl, I did it to give you a way out. I knew you wanted to be with John, and I thought you wouldn't want to stay with the Mendez family. I figured you'd want to go where your heart was. Annie stood there speechless. He knew. All along? Charles smiled at the look of shock on her face, and then turned as if to walk away. But just before stepping inside, he paused and glanced back at her. But honestly, he said, his voice softer, I think you're better off staying here with me. And with that, he went back inside, settling down to continue his chess game. Annie felt like her heart had just been struck by lightning. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, her face suddenly flushed. What did he mean by that? She felt a sudden rush of embarrassment, unsure if she could face Charles right now. Her mind spun. Am I reading too much into this? She wondered. He didn't mean anything by it, right? He'd probably just overheard her argument with John and realized John wasn't the right man for her. That's all. Charles was just looking out for her, nothing more. God, why am I letting my imagination run wild? She shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to get caught up in something that wasn't real. She'd already learned that lesson the hard way. Love and marriage had hurt her before, and she wasn't about to let history repeat itself, not even if the man in question was Charles. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Morrison household was still buzzing with activity. When dinner was served, Corbett opened up 2 more jars of wine, determined to keep the celebration going. Everyone was laughing and drinking, but as usual, Charles didn't seem affected by the alcohol, no matter how many cups he downed. Meanwhile, Corbett had already drunk himself into oblivion, and it was Charles who ended up carrying him back to the bed. By the time Charles returned, it was already past 7 in the evening. Mom, have you seen John? Pearl's voice suddenly cut through the noise, sounding a little panicked. Hedwig, who was clearing dishes, looked up confused. I thought he was resting in your room after lunch? I've looked everywhere, Pearl said, her frustration growing. It's late, and he hasn't come to find me so we can head home. What's going on? Hedwig frowned, concern starting to creep into her expression. Mom, maybe John woke up and went for a walk to clear his head, Pearl suggested, her voice unusually calm. Annie and I can go look for him and bring him back. All right, go on then. Hurry and find him, Hedwig replied, waving them off, not thinking much of it. As Pearl glanced at Annie, giving her a knowing look, Annie nodded in agreement. But this time, Annie noticed something she hadn't before. The faint smirk at the corners of Pearl's lips. She still thinks I'm the same as last life, Annie mused. Still hung up on John. They had barely taken a few steps when Charles's voice called out from behind them, firm and suspicious. Where are you 2 off to this late? Pearl jumped, startled. Her nerves were already on edge, terrified that Annie might say something to ruin her plan. Quickly, she spun around, forcing a smile. Oh, it's nothing. John's gone missing, and we're just going to find him. We'll be back in no time. The guilty look on Pearl's face didn't escape Annie or Charles. They exchanged a fleeting glance, a quiet understanding passing between them. I'll come with you, Charles said, frowning as if he didn't quite believe Pearl's story. No, that's really not necessary, Pearl blurted out, her voice a little too eager. She couldn't let Charles tag along. That would ruin everything. John's probably just wandered off nearby. He's had a bit to drink, so he can't have gone far. And you've had some wine too. If you catch a cold in this wind, you'll regret it. Don't worry, I'll bring him and Annie back safe and sound. Pearl's over-the-top reassurance finally made Charles pause, though his eyes lingered on Annie for a moment longer, clearly still unconvinced. But after a beat, he gave a small nod and turned back toward the house. Pearl let out a quiet sigh of relief, but when she turned back to Annie, her heart skipped a beat. Annie was staring at her, her expression unreadable, her eyes holding something dark, something unnerving. In the dim light, Annie's gaze sent a chill down Pearl's spine. What are you staring at me for? Pearl asked, forcing a laugh, though it came out shaky. Oh, nothing, Annie replied, her voice casual but laced with something else, something Pearl couldn't quite place. I was just wondering, between Charles and John, who do you actually like more? Pearl's smile froze, and she let out a nervous chuckle. What kind of question is that? Let's just go. I don't have time for this nonsense, I need to get home and sleep." She didn't answer the question, and Annie didn't push her. Instead, they walked out into the chilly night together. The air was biting, and frost was already starting to form on the ground, their breath visible in the cold. Annie noticed that every few steps, Pearl glanced back over her shoulder as if checking to make sure Annie was still following her. "Pearl," Annie said softly, her voice carrying an almost teasing lilt. "Charles was the fiancé you didn't want, and John was the man you claimed to love. Have you ever thought about what you'd do if the Mendez family didn't want you anymore? And John didn't love you either." Pearl stopped. Annie didn't have to see her face to know she'd struck a nerve. "What are you even talking about?" Pearl snapped, turning to glare at Annie. Her voice was sharp, defensive. "I don't care about John. If I did, do you think I'd have let you run off with him? You've always had such a wild imagination. No wonder Mom said you were the most scheming one." Annie's words had clearly rattled her. From that point on, Pearl kept her head down, walking faster, leaving Annie to trail behind at a more leisurely pace. Annie watched her sister's retreating figure, a small bitter smile curling at her lips. Fate really is a cruel thing, isn't it? In her past life, Annie had been so certain she could win John back. She had believed that failing her college entrance exam and being forced into a marriage in Pearl's place were the worst things that could happen to her. But she had been wrong. There was a deeper kind of pain waiting for her, one she hadn't seen coming. But this time it wouldn't be her falling into the abyss. This time, Pearl would be the one to face the consequences of her choices. They walked through the village, circling around in search of John, but he was nowhere to be found. As they neared the cornfields, Pearl's frustration seemed to grow. "This doesn't make any sense," Pearl muttered, pretending to be worried. "John promised he'd be here to meet you. Where could he have gone? How about this, you go check the cornfields and I'll head over to the rice paddies. We'll cover more ground that way." "He might have gotten held up somewhere." Annie nodded. "All right." Pearl's face lit up with relief, completely unaware that Annie was on to her. As Annie walked toward the cornfields, Pearl turned and hurried off in the opposite direction, her steps quick and eager. Annie waited until Pearl was out of sight before circling back. She moved silently through the shadows until she was right behind Pearl. Then, without warning, she tapped Pearl on the shoulder. Pearl whirled around, startled, her eyes wide with fear. Annie stood there, smiling sweetly, her face calm under the pale moonlight. Before Pearl could say a word, Annie raised the brick she had been holding and brought it down with a swift, final motion. Chapter 4. Pearl's eyes rolled back, and she collapsed limply. She kicked twice, but Pearl was already unconscious, with no response. Annie dragged her into the cornfield, covered her face with some straw, and then checked her pulse. It was smooth and round, just as expected. She was pregnant. In her previous life, Pearl had taken her kidney to treat her child's kidney disease. Looking around the quiet cornfield with no one in sight, Annie didn't dare to be careless. She quickly hid in the shadows, knowing that Tom would show up soon. Sure enough, not long after, a shadowy figure approached Pearl. The person removed the straw covering Pearl's face, sobering up in shock and turning to flee. Seeing this, Annie jumped out. "What? You see Pearl lying on the ground and want to run? It's you." Recognizing Annie, Tom's eyes gleamed with a greedy light, scanning her up and down. Even though she had mentally prepared herself, seeing Tom again made Annie's head explode with memories of his drunken abuse in her past life. Every time she saw that look in Tom's eyes, she got goosebumps. Annie clenched her hand tightly, forcing herself to stay calm. Charles had promised to help her, so she had to stay calm. "What did you and Pearl conspire about? How much did she pay you?" Seeing her come out, Tom stopped running, casually sitting in the cornfield, lighting a cigarette. "You want to know? Whether I want to or not, you have to tell the truth tonight." "Well, I didn't expect that. You, the eldest daughter of the Morrison family, have some fire in you." Tom looked at her with interest, removing the cigarette from his mouth and patting the ground beside him. "Come sit here and serve me. Make me happy, and I'll tell you." Even now, Tom had no good intentions. Annie looked around, unsure if Charles had followed or been delayed by something. She didn't dare take risks and took 2 steps back. "If you don't want to talk, then forget it." With that, she turned to leave. "Stop!" Tom stood up and yelled. Annie didn't stop, continuing to run. She regretted not making more preparations, even with Charles's promise to help. "I told you to stop, didn't you hear?" Tom quickly caught up, grabbing Annie's arm. "Did I say you could leave? Don't you want to know what Pearl and I conspired about? Come here and I'll tell you." As he spoke, the smell of alcohol, smoke, and dirty feet overwhelmed her, making her stomach turn. "Let go of me." She didn't struggle, her eyes filled with hatred as she looked at Tom. The hatred in her eyes startled Tom, who stiffened. "What if I say no? I told you to let go. I'm now Charles's wife. Do you know the consequences of doing this? It's late, and if Pearl and I don't return soon, my family will come looking. Aren't you afraid your deeds with her will be exposed?" Her fierce gaze made Tom hesitate, glancing back towards the way he came. Tom sneered. "Don't threaten me with your family. If this gets out, who do you think will be ashamed?" "I'm not afraid. You think you can escape? The village won't let you off." "The village, ha?" Tom threw his half-smoked cigarette to the ground. "I'm not afraid. I know all about your family's dirty secrets. If I expose a few, who knows who will be kicked out of the village? You better serve me tonight. If you do, I'll keep quiet." "Thanks, but no thanks. You want someone to serve you, fine Pearl. I did nothing wrong." Annie refused outright. "I'm taking you tonight. What can you do about it? Go ahead, report me. I'll leave the village, but you? After this, the Mendez family won't want you, John doesn't like you, and your family won't take you back. Do you think anyone but me will take you in?" Tom's eyes were bloodshot, driven by lust. He impatiently tried to tear her clothes, but Annie wasn't dumb and wouldn't let him. Just as he thought he had her, Annie raised her leg and kicked him hard in the groin. "Ow!" Tom screamed in the empty cornfield. Annie took the opportunity to run. She was still just a woman, and her kick wasn't very strong. Looking back, she saw Tom, his face red with pain, chasing after her. He quickly caught up. As a notorious troublemaker, Tom had strong fighting skills honed from a life of crime. Annie couldn't match him in strength. He grabbed her arm and dragged her to the ground. Annie was terrified, kicking and struggling, her blows landing painfully. But Tom, drunk and crazed, was more excited by her resistance. "Little girl, struggling makes it more fun. I'll show you." Just as Tom gloated, a tall figure appeared. Annie looked up. The man grabbed Tom by the collar, lifting him and kicking him hard in the back. The kick was so strong that Annie could see the dust fly off Tom in the moonlight. He screamed, rolling several times in the cornfield, unable to get up. "Are you okay?" The man's voice was gentle as he extended a hand to her. She shook her head, slowly raising her chin. The man stood against the light, the dried corn stalks unable to hide his handsome face. It was Charles. He was finally here. Annie instinctively reached out, her pale face burying in Charles's chest. "Thank goodness you came." In that moment of crisis, Annie had imagined countless scenarios, fearing she wouldn't escape Tom's grasp in both lives. But then, Charles appeared. "It's okay now. Don't be afraid," Charles said, knowing the ordeal had scared her. After a few seconds of hesitation, he wrapped his arms around her, gently patting her back. "I'll protect you." Their struggle had only lasted a minute and a half, but for Annie, every second was filled with terror. She bit her lip, thinking how different her past would have been if someone like Charles had saved her. She wouldn't have faced such horrors. Charles's embrace was warm and broad. Annie buried her head in his chest, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Don't be afraid. No matter what happens, I'll protect you," Charles's slightly hoarse voice repeated in her ear. Annie felt like a desperate person in a desert hearing a heavenly melody when she encountered Charles. Who are you? How dare you hit me? I'll make you wish you were dead." As they hugged tightly, almost forgetting about Tom, his voice rang out. Charles turned to look at him. Annie thought Charles would say something, but he released her and walked towards Tom. Without a word, he kicked Tom again several times, then coldly said, "I'm hitting you. What else can you do besides bully women?" Tom, a notorious thug, had never faced someone so ruthless. Beaten into the ground, he begged for mercy, realizing Charles might actually kill him. Annie watched Tom, now bruised and swollen, laugh. Serves him right. A scoundrel like him only bullied women. What else could he do? Charles tied Tom up with the rope Tom had brought. Tom didn't resist, lying on the ground with a swollen face, terrified of Charles. He looked like a ghost seeing the Grim Reaper. Seeing her lifelong tormentor tied up, powerless, Annie felt her heart beat stronger. The fear of his past abuse resurfaced, making it hard to breathe. She picked up a brick and smashed it on Tom's head. Tom, thinking he had escaped Charles's wrath, was caught off guard. Blood flowed from his nose as he blacked out. Annie hit him hard. Realizing he was barely breathing, she panicked. "Did I kill him?" Charles stepped forward, pressing his foot on Tom's chest. Tom coughed and begged, "Please, I was wrong." "He's not dead," Charles said, removing his foot. Annie finally calmed down, her breathing steady. But Charles's gaze made her nervous. She quickly hid her emotions, afraid he'd see through her. "You hate him?" Charles asked. Annie shook her head, then nodded. "He tried to do something dirty to me. Of course I hate him." Charles eyed her suspiciously but didn't press further. Tom, waking up with a bloody forehead, pleaded, "Please have mercy. I won't do it again." "What did you and Pearl conspire?" Charles, his brow furrowed, eyes icy, demanded. Tom, terrified, confessed. "Pearl and John had an affair. They planned the bride swap. I found out she was pregnant with John's child. To buy my silence, she offered to lure Annie to the cornfield for me. So tonight was Pearl's idea?" Charles's face darkened, his gaze cutting like a blade. Tom, trembling, nodded. Yes, yes. Pearl was jealous of Annie's engagement to John. She seduced John and then, finding Charles handsome, plotted against her sister. Charles, furious, lifted Tom by the arms and threw him, sending him flying into the cornfield, raising a cloud of dust. Having gotten the answers, Annie looked at Charles. "Brother, what should we do now?" Charles glanced at Tom. "You know what to say?" "Yes, yes," Tom nodded repeatedly. After dealing with everything, it was late. Though White Mountain Village was next to Great Young Village, everyone in the Mendez family was asleep, so they decided to stay at Annie's home for the night. But the night was far from peaceful. Annie had just fallen asleep when commotion erupted outside. "Fire! Help! There's a fire! What's going on? The cornfield is on fire!" Someone shouted outside. Hearing this, people grabbed buckets and rushed to the cornfield. Though it was winter and the corn had been harvested, the nearby village warehouse was at risk. If the stored grain for spring planting burned, it would be disastrous. Annie, carrying a bucket, followed them. From a distance, she saw thick smoke rising from the cornfield. Pearl had planned well, even using fire as a distraction. When the villagers reached the field, they found it was a false alarm. Though the smoke was thick, the fire was small. But two people, a man and a woman, lay in the cornfield. The village chief recognized the man first. "Tom, you drunk fool, what have you done?" Before he could finish, he saw the woman and fell silent. "What's going on?" Pearl, groggy, complained about the noise, unaware of the situation. Before she could open her eyes, a slap landed on her face, forcing her to look up at an angry woman. "You little slut, how dare you seduce my son?" Pearl, her head buzzing from the slap, looked around in shock. She and Tom lay in the cornfield, surrounded by villagers pointing and whispering. The cold wind swirled and Pearl felt dazed, not knowing what to do. "You whore, seducing my son. Do you know who you are? I'll teach you." Tom's mother yelled. This was supposed to be Annie's fate. No, this couldn't be real. Pearl looked at the crowd and saw John's cold, hateful eyes. At that moment, one thought filled her mind. She was finished. Chapter 5. Zhugu had grown up pampered by her mother, Fong Lu, never having faced any real hardships. The shock of the moment was too much for her, and she fainted immediately. Watching from the outskirts of the crowd, Jingu remembered how she was ridiculed and left in rags in her previous life. She almost wanted to tell Zhu, "Your life is just beginning. This is nothing." Both Mr. Qin and his son stood dumbfounded among the crowd. Zhu's mother-in-law, Mrs. Zhang, was about to rush forward, but Mr. Qin held her back. "Mom, let's not go up there. It's too embarrassing." Mr. Qin had broken off an engagement for Zhu, only to discard her now that a scandal had erupted. Jean chuckled coldly to herself. It was evident that Mr. Qin's feelings were fleeting. If he could abandon someone for Zhu today, he could just as easily abandon Zhu for someone else tomorrow. A familiar male voice came from behind. Your grand performance has started. Turning around, Jean saw the handsome face of Matthew Shun. Yes, the show has begun. Let's hope Robert Zhao doesn't mess up. Matthew smiled. He won't dare. If he does, we'll report his scheming with Zhu against you directly to the authorities. Exactly. He can't afford the consequences, Jean replied, looking like she was enjoying the drama. Seeing Matthew reminded Jean of the previous night's events. He had protected her, yet she had been wary of him. Feeling a bit guilty, she asked, "Did you get cold last night after going out?" "No worries, a little cold is nothing to me," he replied with a smile. Gordon Gu was dragged to the cornfield, initially unable to believe what he saw. Once he realized what was happening, it was like he had been struck by lightning. Enraged, he picked up a red brick from the ground and charged into the cornfield. Gordon calmed down. Village Chief Mr. Lei tried to stop him, but it was too late. Gordon's eyes were bloodshot as he struck Robert Zhao, who had just regained consciousness, with the brick. Robert fainted again. Mr. Lei, alarmed, called for others to restrain Gordon, fearing someone might get seriously hurt. Several village officials rushed to hold him back, and Mr. Lei shouted for the crowd to disperse. At that moment, Fong Lu finally made her way through the crowd. Seeing Zhu and Robert lying together, she began to wail loudly. "My poor daughter, how did you end up like this?" Just yesterday, they had been celebrating Zhu's return. She never imagined such a scandal could occur. Given the severity of the situation and the public nature of the incident, the village officials summoned Robert, Zhu, and their families to the community office for questioning. Mr. Qin sat with his head down, not even glancing at Zhu. Even the usually fair village chief, Mr. Qin Sr., remained silent. Such a scandal on the third day of marriage was unbearable for any family. Mrs. Zhang, a teacher, felt utterly humiliated. How could we be so unlucky to marry such a shameless woman into our family? You don't even know the full story, you blind woman. Fong Lu shouted. My daughter is innocent. It's all Robert's fault. I won't let him get away with this. While most people leaned towards believing Zhu was the victim, Robert regained consciousness and said, Zhu was the one who asked me to meet her. Zhu opened her mouth to deny it, but Robert continued. When she came to see me yesterday afternoon, Wang Er saw her. He can testify. The village officials immediately brought in Wang Er, who confirmed that he had often seen Zhu and Robert sneaking around together. With 2 witnesses, the case against Zhu was almost sealed. Robert was no fool. He had been scared into a cold sweat by Matthew's warning the previous night. If he admitted to conspiring with Zhu to harm Jean, he would be severely punished. Since he had not succeeded and now faced accusations of taking advantage of Zhu, he decided to pin everything on her. He claimed that Zhu had invited him and seduced him the previous night. This way, he could avoid the most severe consequences, while Zhu was left with no way to explain why she was in the cornfield or deny her clandestine meetings with Robert. Zhu tried to argue that she had gone out to look for Mr. Qin and only encountered Robert by chance, but her claims were far less convincing than Robert's testimony. The truth that emerged was that Zhu and Robert had an ongoing affair and were simply caught this time. Zhu was left speechless and unable to defend herself until she saw Jean in the crowd. She rushed towards her. Jean, it was you. You set me up, didn't you? Jean deftly avoided her, coldly replying, What did I do to you? Indeed, what had Jean done? Everything Zhu was experiencing was what Jean had endured in her past life. Zhu's suffering was merely a return of what she had inflicted. Had Zhu not devised such a malicious plan, Jean might have only revealed the truth about the swapped brides in public. But the depths of human malice are unfathomable. It's you. You tricked me into going to the cornfield. Zhu cried hysterically. Fong Lu, hearing this, rushed forward to hit Jean. You little wretch, how dare you harm my daughter? Jean was with me all night. Matthew stepped in front of Jean, shielding her, his expression cold. Zhu, how can you falsely accuse me? Didn't you ask me to help you find Mr. Qin? When I couldn't find him, I found my brother who took me home. I thought you had found Mr. Qin and gone home yourself. How can you now turn on me? It was you who insisted I go with you last night. My brother even offered to come with us, but you refused. Jean took the opportunity to recount the previous night's events, her voice tinged with hurt. I know you're upset about what Robert did to you, but you can't blame me for everything. You said we should split up to look for Mr. Chin. How was I to know you were meeting Robert? Jin's account was flawless. Many people at the party had heard Zhu ask Jin to help find Mr. Chin and refuse Matthew's company. The final remark, "How was I to know you were meeting Robert?" was a devastating blow. You little liar, what nonsense are you spouting? Zhu was at a loss, unable to even start explaining, and in her fury, she nearly fainted, cursing Jin. Enough! Mr. Chin suddenly stood up, his face dark. He had been watching the drama unfold like a statue, but now he spoke. Looking at Zhu with deep hatred, he said, "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" Zhu, shocked, stammered, "What did you say?" "Haven't you embarrassed yourself enough?" he repeated, his face ashen. "Zhu, how could you be so shameless? I was engaged to your sister, yet you seduced me and tricked me into marrying you. And now I find out you're involved with Robert. How could you do such disgraceful things?" His words caused an uproar in the office. Zhu felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She tried to defend herself. You can't say that about me. Our relationship was... What was it? You seducing me? Offering yourself? Suggesting the marriage swap? Mr. Chin was relentless. Mentioning the marriage swap, Fong Lu suddenly realized. She rushed towards Mr. Chin and knelt. "Son-in-law, this is all my fault. I wanted you to marry into your family, so I encouraged her to spend time with you. You can't blame her now. So you made her seduce me, so I had no choice but to marry her?" Mr. Chin interrupted harshly. Under the intense scrutiny, Fong Lu tearfully nodded. "It's all my fault. Don't blame Zhu. It's me who caused this." The mother-daughter bond was evident. Fong Lu was willing to take all the blame to ensure Zhu's future in the Olsen family. Jin sneered. She wouldn't let Zhu escape so easily. "Mom," Jin said, her lips trembling as she looked at Fong Lu. "So, that's why you drugged me and sent me to the Shen family? You did all this for Zhu, sacrificing me for the marriage swap. You little brat, if I tell you to marry, you marry. You have no say in this." Fong Lu's arrogance returned. Realizing she had said too much, Fong Lu tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The truth about the marriage swap was now clear. As for Zhu and Robert's affair, it was now a problem for the Qin, Zhao, and Gu families to resolve. Mr. Qin's face turned pale and then flushed with anger. Behind him, Mr. Qin Sr. and Mrs. Zhang looked equally appalled. Mrs. Zhang, trembling, wanted to mention divorce. But before she could, Gordon Gu stepped forward, veins bulging in his forehead. He grabbed Fong Lu and Zhu, pulling them up and slapping each of them hard across the face. Gordon had never felt so humiliated. Zhu had not only disgraced him but had also conspired with Fong Lu to manipulate and deceive under his nose, undermining his authority as the head of the family. Gordon, a man accustomed to hard labor, struck with all his might. Zhu, stunned, could hardly believe her usually gentle father would hit her so hard. She stood up, challenging him. "Dad, how can you hit me when I've been wronged like this? Are you even my father? I don't have such a disgraceful daughter. Get out of my house and never come back," Gordon shouted, veins bulging on his forehead, his voice full of rage. Zhu was terrified by her father's outburst. She had never seen him this furious before. Growing up, she had always been pampered by her mother, Fong Lu, and even if Gordon got angry occasionally, he would never treat her like this. Even now, Fong Lu tried to protect her daughter. "Have you gone mad? Our daughter is being framed." "Framed? Who framed her?" Both men have come forward and confessed. "Stop making excuses," Gordon roared at Fong Lu. "From now on, if either of you says one bad word about Jean, you'll both be out of my house for good." Fong Lu fell silent immediately. Zhu bit her lip, looking desperately between Mr. Qin and Jean, tears streaming down her face. She stammered, "Mr. Qin, you can't abandon me. I'm already pregnant with your child. 2 months. It was the first time I gave myself to you. You remember, don't you? My poor Zhu. You're the one who's been taken advantage of, and now it's all your fault? Your heartless father won't stand up for you." Fong Lu wailed, throwing herself on the ground, crying loudly. Mrs. Zhang was on the verge of fainting from anger. If it hadn't been for Mr. Qin Sr. holding her back, she would have slapped both Zhu and Fong Lu. He sighed, looking at Mr. Qin. What do you intend to do now? Mr. Qin stood there, his face dark with fury. Jean could imagine how conflicted he felt, realizing too late that the bride he had been so eager to marry was capable of such deceit. Zhu threw herself at Mr. Qin's feet. Mr. Qin, please, you can't leave me. I'm pregnant with your child. You know it, it's been 2 months. Fong Lu, realizing the gravity of the situation, joined in. Yes, Mr. Qin, our Zhu has given her pure body to you. Now she's carrying your child. If you abandon her, you're driving her to despair. They played their trump card, forcing Mr. Qin to acknowledge the engagement with no way out. Fine, I'll take responsibility, Mr. Qin said, clenching his fists. After a long silence, the room fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. Fong Lu immediately sat up, dusting off her clothes. Son-in-law, are you serious? You'll treat my daughter well from now on? We'll be counting on you after you graduate. Mr. Qin closed his eyes, then opened them, his fists clenching and unclenching. Yes, I'll take responsibility. Fong Lu and Zhu burst into tears of joy. Zhu was so overwhelmed she could hardly speak. Mr. Qin, I promise I won't make the same mistakes again, But before she could finish, Mr. Qin walked out, not waiting for Zhu or even looking back at her. Mrs. Zhang was surprised and chased after him. Son, think carefully. You can't marry such a morally corrupt woman. Mr. Qin ignored his mother's words, walking straight ahead without looking back. After Mr. Qin left, the drama involving Robert, Mr. Qin, and the marriage swap came to an end. The crowd dispersed, and the incident quickly became the talk of Willowbrook Village. No one had expected that the scandal involving Zhu and Robert would also reveal Zhu's deliberate seduction of her sister's fiancé, Mr. Qin, and that she was carrying his child. Such a sensational story spread quickly among the villagers. The events weighed heavily on the hearts of everyone in the Gu and Qin families. What was supposed to be a joyous wedding had ended in such a disgraceful manner. Jean had fulfilled her promise to prove her innocence in front of everyone. She and Matthew didn't stay in Willowbrook Village for long. After the crowd dispersed, they returned to White Hill Village. The news soon reached the Shen family. Grandma Shen was overjoyed, holding Jin's hand. I knew you were a good girl, not like that cunning sister of yours. Jean, from now on, stay away from your mother and sister. Stay with us in the Shen family and we will treat you well. Lian Mei, who had initially been biased against Jean, now praised her. You've suffered enough with a biased mother and a heartless sister. From now on, if anyone dares to bully you, I'll be the first to stand up for you. Thank you, Mom. Jin's eyes were still red, but her heart was filled with joy. Suddenly, Gordon Gu arrived at the Shun family home in White Hill Village, his lips trembling as he looked at Jean, almost crying. Jean, it's my fault. He couldn't finish his sentence. Jean remained silent for a moment, then softly said, It's okay, Dad. Just take care of yourself and Mom from now on. She held Grandma Shan's hand tightly, saying it was okay, but tears ran down her face, falling to the ground. Zhu was vicious and Fong Lu was biased. Jean had grown up amidst scolding and abuse. She would never return to that pit of despair. But she still had feelings for her father. She understood how hard he worked, seldom managing household affairs, not because he didn't care, but because he was too exhausted. When Fong Lu suggested the marriage swap, Gordon had strongly opposed it. That's why it took over a month to finalize. Fong Lu had secretly arranged everything behind his back, telling him that it was Jin's choice. Gordon couldn't control his wife or find the strength to argue. Today, the truth finally came to light. Jean knew that Gordon's guilt and pain had reached a breaking point, prompting him to come to White Hill Village, crying and apologizing. Forcing a smile, she said, I'm doing well in the Shun family. I'll be fine. Don't worry. With that, she turned and went to her room. There was nothing more to say. The scolding, pain, and scheming were in the past. Given a second chance by fate, she wouldn't let her life remain stuck in the mire. The future was bright. As she wept and walked forward, she heard Grandma Shun reassuring Gordon, It's all right, Gordon. Go back and live well. Since Jean is now part of our family, we'll take good care of her. Don't worry. Lian Mei followed her, comforting her. Don't be sad, my daughter-in-law. The past is behind you. Focus on your future with Matthew. With such a biased mother and a heartless sister, you've had a tough time. I used to think Zhu was a good girl, but I was wrong. From now on, if anyone dares to bully you, I'll be the first to stand up for you. Thank you, Mom. Jin's eyes were still red, but she felt a warmth in her heart. For the first time, she had proven herself, and the Shun family would no longer see her as someone who schemed her way into the family. She could now stay with the Shun family with her head held high.